So folks, we'll be starting in a few minutes. Just want to say hi to a few people that are already logged in here. So say hi to Jim and Lynn, Brenda, Corinne, Dan and Kim, Gail, Graham, and Carlisle, Lucille, Mark, Michelle, Mike, another Mike, Susie, and Benedict, and Kathy and Ed as well. So just say hi to all of you that are online right now. And we'll be starting, like I say, in just a few moments. Well, good evening, folks. It's 7 o'clock, and I like to try and start things and keep things on time and on track, as we have got lots of different things to go through tonight. I'm Dennis Lyons. I'm the president of the Winnipeg RASC, and just like to welcome everybody that's here on Zoom, as well as on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So before I start here, I just want to make a treaty acknowledgement, and I'll just read here. The lands from which our members and guests are joining us are located on original lands of I knew I'd miss this one up, Anishinaabe, Cree, OJ Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nations. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So we're going to start with our beginner session, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight, who is Stan Runge. Stan is a longtime member of the RASC Winnipeg, who enjoys working with members to assist them in getting the most from their observing experiences. And tonight, Stan is talking on using the Coronado Loner Scope and the Sun and H Alpha. Please welcome Stan Runge.
Hello, I'll just start by putting my video or my PowerPoint presentation on. Okay, I'll start my presentation with the usual warning. Anytime we tell somebody to be looking at the sun, we've got to give a little bit of a warning and such. So observing the sun can be very dangerous, and we should always be using specialized equipment and filters. So here's the warning. The device I'm speaking about today is a telescope which is okay for solar viewing when used correctly. So way back when I started doing astronomy, which is quite a long time ago, looking at the sun, probably the only way you'd see the sun would be in white light.
Stan?
Yes?
Can you share your screen, please? We're just seeing you right now.
Okay, pardon me.
You look lovely, but we want to see your presentation.
No, you're right in the first case. I thought I guess I missed the button there. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Scott. And here's my presentation. Okay, there we go. Better?
Nope.
Nope.
Do you not see it?
No, sir.
No.
Okay, I'll try this one more time. Sorry about that. So now,
Nope, still nothing.
multiple participants.
No, you should just click on share screen And that should share whatever is on your screen to the meeting.
Yeah.
You have two screens, Scott? Or
Yeah, good question. Stan, are you using two monitors?
Nope.
Here, I'm just gonna share mine for a second. And oh no, there you go. Now you're going. This is the first meeting that we've run as a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar, and so all of the controls are slightly different than they have been for the last year. So that's my excuse. I'm sticking to it.
Finally, black screen followed by there. Okay.
perfect.
There's the safety warning. So proceed from here. So as I was saying, back when I started over 50 years ago in astronomy, looking at the sun, we basically looked at it in white light. And what you did is you either looked through a scope that had a filter, or you projected it onto a white screen, and you'd look at it there. And this is basically how we saw the sun. You'd have to go to an eclipse in order to see anything more. And literally, you go to an eclipse and you'd see things like this here at the bottom, the prominences, but they required a big trip. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this presentation is because I wanted to get some stimulation on the solar scope that the club owns. And one of the reasons why now is a better time is because we're at the start of the solar cycle 25, and the number of sunspots is increasing, and the number of prominences that will be visible will be increasing. It's been a little bit dire the past few years, but things are starting to pick up. As you can see, we're 2020 is right at the bottom, 2021, we're well on our way. Now, there are two ways that amateurs tend to observe the sun. One is with a solar filter, relatively inexpensive, put onto the sun. You're looking at the sun with just 1/100,000th of the amount of light. So when you're looking at the sun, you're looking at the basic photosphere, the background here. You'll be looking at things such as the faculae, which is, I don't know if you could see it here. There's a white spot here you could just see on the edge of the limb. Or you'll be looking at sunspot groups. The other way that we can now look at the sun is using monochromatic filters, where you're just looking at a narrow wavelength of light. Now, the most common is the hydrogen alpha, which I'm speaking about today, or the violet calcium K-line filter. This image here on the left side is the view with the hydrogen alpha filter, and in this here I'm showing some of the things that we'll be talking about, that we're going to be looking at. Now, within the complex spectrum that's the sun puts out, hydrogen shows up in 4 locations. So of the 4, the red one here at the edge, at the right edge, that's the H alpha one. And from now on, I'll just call it H alpha, which is a frequency of approximately 656 nanometers. But it's also the brightest one. So it shows up very well, and prominences glow in that frequency. So here's the scope I'm talking about, the Coronado PST. So now that you can have scopes such as this, and for about $1,000, you can be looking at the sun in hydrogen alpha. So the scope itself is just a 40 millimeter scope, so it's the smallest of all the solar viewing scopes that are out there. It's an F10, but it has a totally built-in filtering system for safe viewing. The basic unit, similar to the one that the club owns, only has a 1 angstrom band pass. I'll show later on the difference between the 1 angstrom and a smaller half angstrom H alpha band pass telescope, where you can see far more details. But in order to get the price down, they built it with this with the 1 angstrom bandpass. The scope can attach with the typical camera mounting bolt on the bottom, and it has a built-in solar filter. So let's get a little bit more into the scope. So one of the advantages of being a member of the Winnipeg Centre is that we have the lovely loaner program that has different scopes. And a number of years ago, we added the Corona PST. One came available and we bought it and used it. Now, this is not the picture of the one we have, but basically it comes in a black case just like this. There's the scope. Plus we have 2 eyepieces that come with it, the 25 and 18 millimeter eyepiece, a 2-power Barlow, and we've added to the kit some pieces for people who want to do imaging with it. So there is a 1.25" T adapter, and then T-rings to allow you to connect a Canon or a Nikon DSLR. Included with the kit, we also provide an equatorial mount. Now this is the Star Watcher Sky Adventurer mount. You can use this mount in the evenings to be imaging the night sky. You can also mount the solar telescope on it. And it also comes with the tripod. So there's a list of the loaner unit of what we have. So it's the scope, the eyepieces, the T-rings, the azimuth tripod, and the special equatorial mount that goes with it. So for beginners, let's get into it a little bit. So one of the first things I would suggest if you take out this loaner scope is that you have to become familiar with the operation of the mount itself. It takes a little bit to get used to. There is a guide that's provided with it. So the suggestion is you take it out during the daytime sometime, set it up, and see the dynamics of the mount. Basically, it's a small equatorial mount that's run by batteries, and you put them in there, and it will allow you to have the equatorial mount tracking the sun. So then, when you finally do set up the PST, you'll pull out the tripod, and you'll put the equatorial mount onto it, and then you'll polar align it. Now, of course, you can't see Polaris during the daytime, so you'll be aligning it based upon where you know is north, or as I put down, a compass that's pointing relatively north, or today, most people have phones with apps that will show them north. So you'll align your mount, be pointing north, and install the PST scope onto the back. So here are the parts of the PST. So you can see I show where the eyepieces will go. Again, there's 2 different eyepieces giving you different power. And then there's the 2-power Barlow, which allows you to double the power. So you can observe the sun in 16, 22, 32, or 44 power. At the bottom side of it, you can see where the focus knob is. And then you can also see something called the tuning mechanism. And the tuning mechanism adjusts the PST slightly so that you can, it basically adjusts the range that the scope is looking through, and it will allow you to see a little bit more surface detail on one side, and a little bit more prominence features at the other side. On top of the solar scope is the finder. Now, basically the finder takes light in from the front of the scope, bends it inside the scope, and brings it up to this little circle. So what you will do is try to align the scope into the middle of the circle. So as you can see here, when you can see the sun in the middle of this circle, then you know you're able to, you'll have the sun here in the eyepiece. So when you basically look the first time, what do you expect to see? Well, this is what you'll see. You'll see a red circle. You'll see some features on it, such as this, and then you'll see some prominences off to the side here. Now, the thing I wanted to point out about this particular view is that you notice it gets brighter in the middle, and the PST does have what's known as the sweet spot. So the most light, transmission of light, is in the center. You can see how it drops off. The sun normally has a drop off of light to the edge, but it has the scope itself has a sweet spot where it shows more of a brighter image in the center. And I mentioned that because when you want to see the prominences well, that's where I suggest you place them. So once you've got the sun centered and you've been focusing and you've got the edges nice and sharp in focus, that's when you start to play with the tuning mechanism. So you turn it a little bit one way, a little bit the other way, just to see. It only turns about overall a full half turn. So you should never be forcing it. It'll rotates relatively easily, and you look at the sun and you see what you like. Now, if you adjust the mount and put the sun so it's just slightly off to one side, you can take a prominence and put it into the center of the field of view that you're looking, and that's where you'll see the best details when you're looking at the sun. Now, there is a guide, and this is provided along, that talks about how to tune and how to focus the telescope. So again, read this through, and this will explain to you, and it's relatively easy, how to set up the focusing and how to set up the tuning mechanism of the scope. So what are we going to be looking for? So when we're looking at the sun, and the first type, as things pick up, they'll be generally available. These days when you look, these things are still a little bit chancy, but there's more and more. So what you're going to be looking is at different things. Now, there's these areas like this, which are whiter, the phalgi, as they're called. These are spots that are sites of active sunspot groups, and they're lighter in color. So they'll be whitish, more brilliant, lighter to see. When you compare the sun in white and hydrogen alpha, sometimes you'll see these, but you won't. But if you look at the sun in white, you won't even see that there's a sunspot there. But this is a location where sunspot groups are forming. The other interesting thing is you'll see these, which are the filaments here. Here's a good picture showing the filaments. So a filament actually is when you're looking at a prominence from a more direct on view. When I was showing you the prominences earlier, they're the ones that were off to the side of the view. But if you're looking at them straight on, they're something that are above the sun, and the sun's disk is so bright that it makes them look darker. So that's what a filament looks like. It looks. It was described as a bushy eyebrow or sinuous snake sort of feature. So these are the filaments that you'll see. The other thing that's easily seen in this one particular image is that you could see the motley effect on the sun itself. And then the third thing, and this is the one that I really focus on, and if you're on our distribution list, occasionally I put pictures of the prominences. So the prominences are off to the side of the sun as such. These are the things that you usually spend tens of thousands of dollars and go see them at eclipses, but you can see them now from your backyard. The one interesting thing about prominences is that they're quite active. And if you observe them over a period of time, you will see changes. My girlfriend Lorraine has seen prominences where she has seen the material slowly shooting off of the sun and become brighter, higher, curling over, and then coming back down on the other side. So she's seen it go up and over like that. So prominences are one of the most beautiful things you can see. So there are classifications of the prominences, and here's a list. So sometimes you'll see things such as this, the hedgerow, or things like this. They call these curtains. They're fairly filled and as such. The most interesting for me actually is these arcs, because often you could see them as shown here, and they will build and build. So the gap here underneath will get larger and larger over a period of time, and then the arc will collapse. And this is sort of what it looks like after it's sort of collapsed. And then here's a cap. Here's one that I was telling you about earlier about watching them come up, and this will go up, and then you'll see material come down. So prominence are very, very interesting objects for a beginner to watch and enjoy. So I've taken some images with the PST, and here's an example of some of the different features that you'll see, and you could see in a single frame that there are a number of different types showing. Here's the hedgerow. Here's a little filament off the edge. Here's another one. This is more like the curtain one that was described, and you could see just here, you can see some of the features on the sun itself. And as I said, the most interesting thing is that they change over time. So this is one picture that was taken that shows you how extensive the prominences can be. But I have some shots, and I unfortunately couldn't track them down. Some shots where over a period of 30 minutes, the prominence looked quite distinctively different because of the amount of change. So better way to see things. So this is one of the sketches put on that Sylvia recently put onto the Facebook page that's shared by the group of people who do drawings. So if you want to capture what you see, one possible way is to do this, is to go on and draw. If you're interested, contact Sylvia and she'll explain to you how you can or give guidelines on how to do things. This is one day just last week, in fact. So when I was talking earlier about the sun is becoming more active, it had prominences in multiple locations. Now here, she actually drew in sort of where there was a sunspot. And here's one of those filaments that she saw as well. So before you're going to go view, and if you want to know, is the sun very active today, this is a website that I always check. I have this as an app on my phone. It's the Gong H Alpha site for the National Solar Observatory. And what it is a site that shows images from different telescopes from around the world. The ones that have a check mark happen to be the ones that are active and doing images. And then the ones that don't have a check mark, they'll tell you that this image here was last taken 7 hours previous. So if you click on one of these images, it'll show you for that one particular site. So this is just what day was this? This was last month, a day. This is nice because you could see there's the filament, the flange, and there's different prominence on there. And then you can zoom up on it so you could see sort of what it's like. So if it's cloudy, you could be looking at this and come back half an hour and see and watch the prominences changing. So some of the things that really help when you are looking is this: the use of an overhead towel or white shield or light shield. So I have one of these. It's white on the outside. It's black material on the inside of it. You put it over your head. You cover up everything around your face where you're looking through the eyepiece, and then you look through the eyepiece. And what it helps do is really increase the contrast between the sun and the background. So if you're looking without one of these, you'll see things, but once you put the overhead towel or the light shield on it, the image improves quite dramatically. A couple of things I wanted to mention was that if we have a day where there's light cirrus clouds overhead, they tend to really distract. They really take away from the ability to see the prominences. So if I'm filming, taking images, and time goes by, and I noticed that the prominences almost disappeared. That's probably because of the clouds. The other thing I wanted to say is, if you're going to be looking, the best part is look on days that the temperature gradient isn't so great. So days where it's going from, say, 15 overnight to 22 during the day. So there's only a change of about 7 degrees Celsius during the day. Those are the days where the atmosphere is the most stable and things are best. If you go on days where it's going from a low of 8 overnight to 32 during the daytime, that change shows up dramatically in how well the image looks and the quality of what you see. Here's I was talking before about what higher price scopes will do. If you got a second filter on the front of the PST, the image shows up somewhat better. When you do take images, you'll notice that the edge of the sun, and this is hard to see when you're looking naked eye, but you'll see these spicules that are on it, and it's almost looks like a little fur on the edge of the sun. So anyway, I do know that there's a time limit on my presentation and that Dave's supposed to be talking in a few minutes. So I'll stop the sharing there and throw it open for just a couple quick questions if there are any.
How do you take photos? Is there a certain exposure time?
Okay, I did not talk today at all about the imaging of them, because that in itself is its own talk. There are a few ways that you can quickly do it. If you have a cell phone and you have one of the cell phone adapters that you can attach over top of the eyepiece, you take some shots that way, and often the camera will auto expose for the correct exposure. The other option is, as I said, there's units with the camera, and you could put a DSLR onto it. But that's a whole process all on its own. And at some point in time in the future, if asked, I'll do a talk on specifically imaging the sun and some of the software that I use in doing imaging of the sun. And by the way, just over my shoulder here, I was going to show, this is the shield that I use. So you put the white on the outside, because if you put the black on the outside, it gets really, really hot in there. But you put the white on the outside to reflect away the sun, and the black makes a dark area and helps increase the contrast of the sun. Any more questions?
If anybody has questions, they can put the question in the chat box and we can either unmute you or just have Stan answer that. So just give everybody a moment there, Stan, if they want to type something up in the chat box.
Okay, I noticed that the Dave's got something lined up for us, so we don't want to interfere too much with his time.
No, we got technically 4 minutes, so there we go. Can you see that, Stan?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Michelle. Yes. I had a slide earlier. They tend to be about $1,000. I think that there's a site, Ontario Telescopes, and I thought I saw the other day that it was about $1,000. I wouldn't suggest ordering it through the States. I know Amazon CA occasionally has them on. They don't always have them available, but they're about $1,000. My whole point is that there's one available. If you want to try the PST, borrow the club scope one, try it out, see if you like it. If you don't like it, it's like any of the other telescopes that we have, loaners. You try them out and you see whether it's what you want to try and do. And like I say, the scope one also has an equatorial mount on it. You could use it for imaging, therefore, because it's tracking the sun, makes it easy to image, and you could also use it for imaging at night. So it's kind of a nice double bundle.
Yeah, I just got this toy not too long ago. It's about twice the price of a Coronado, but you can stick it on a refractor.
Do you need to have an energy rejection filter with that?
If it's less than 80 millimeter aperture, you should have an IR cut filter in front of your diagonal, but that's about it. The whole thing is a 1 unit. It has the Etalon energy rejector and the built-in Barlow. So it's for an f5 to about an f7 scope.
And that would allow you to use a larger aperture scope, larger than the 40 mil. 40 millimeters means that there's a limit to the amount of light that you're allowing in. a limited amount of detail that you can have.
Yeah, and this is about 1,600 or so on Ontario telescopes.
Yeah. So
And-
before you spend the 1,600, try to see if you even enjoy solar observing.
Yeah, I would recommend using the PST first. I actually borrowed a friend's Coronado to try that out.
You got time for 2 questions there, Stan.
Okay. Yes, you can get these elsewhere, commercially made. Online, you have to look for them. I have a lovely girlfriend who made about 4 or 5 of them at one point in time and passed them out to a number of our observers in the club. There was one question prior to that.
Yeah, the question was, are the batteries for the PST rechargeable?
They're just regular, I believe they're just AA batteries. I think it takes 4 AA batteries.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Stan, for
Thanks,
talking
Stan.
about that and letting
Thanks,
people
Stan.
know about
You're welcome.
the Loner Scope program, in particular the Solar Scope, the PST. And what we'll do here is I'm just going to share a screen, I think. And as I just said there, we have, again, thank you to Stan. So the lineup for tonight is, this is what we're looking at, is we have our beginner session, which we just finished. I'm going to do a short welcome. We have our main presentation tonight, which is Dave Lane, and I'll introduce him slightly. Tonight, slightly different is we've got a break. The break we're going to try and open up for about a 10-minute period to chat, just general chat, to try and get a chance to socialize, see how it works. If it goes well, then the next meeting we will set up actual breakout rooms. So if somebody wants to talk about potentially astro sketching or astrophotography, they could get together for the period of the break. And then those rooms would be closed down and brought back. So tonight we just want to see how it goes with an open discussion, just kind of a chance for us to say hi, because with COVID, we really can't get together. And then of course we'll have our what's up and what's new, and then followed by our virtual get together. Once again, I'm going to start the meeting off with our formal meeting with a treaty acknowledgement. And the lands from which our members and guests are joining us are located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So tonight's main speaker is Dave Lane, and he'll be talking about robotic observatories. Now, Dave Lane is a past national president and a fellow of the RASC. In his day job at St. Mary's University, he is a director of its Burke-Gaffney Observatory. At home, he operates the Abbey Ridge Observatory, which is mainly used for variable star observations, and in the past used to discover 4 supernovae. Much of his time over the past 10 years has been spent developing and operating innovative robotic telescopes used by about 1,000 observers for education, research, most importantly, fun. Please welcome Dave Lane, and I will stop sharing now.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for the invite. I have not spoken to the Winnipeg Centre before. It's one of the few centers that I didn't get to during the days when we used to do those presidential tours around the country. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. While I'm doing that, since you acknowledged where you are, we in Nova Scotia acknowledge, and I am in Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq First Nation. Okay, so let's start. So this talk is about a project that I started, I guess, a few years ago when I was clandestinely gathering parts one at a time in a small enough dollar quantities that my boss wouldn't notice on monthly credit cards, to build a small telescope that would act like the big one, which I'll talk about in a second, that I operate for the students. And the timing was such that in mid-March last year, as happened to many of us, we were all told to go home and make ourselves productive at work at home. So I basically gathered up everything I could possibly fit in my car from the office and took it home: telescopes, parts, cables, anything I thought I could use for this project, because the term was just ending and I had to come up with something to do. Let's see if I can make this go forward. There we go. So yeah, so the motivation for doing this project was to leverage on my existing telescopes that I've been working on for the last number of years. On the right is the large version. That's a 24-inch plane wave. That's at RASC Observatory in Halifax at St. Mary's University. It's used principally for student projects. It's used by observers around the world robotically, and it's also used for public outreach. There is actually an eyepiece over here that you would put in to look with your own eyes. The one in the middle is the Abbey Ridge Observatory, which is in my backyard here, out my window. It's a Celestron 14. I built that back in 2003. And shortly thereafter got into supernova searching with a friend of mine, some of you know, Paul Gray, and we ended up discovering 3 or 4, I guess, supernovae. And then I got into variable stars and went on from there. The one I'm talking about tonight is the what I'm calling the Mini Robotic Observatory, MRO. My wife calls it Minimo. I'm not sure why. It's lives in our backyard, which is about 30 kilometers west of Halifax. So it's in a reasonably dark location. As I mentioned, I needed something to do once I was sent home. So I had to basically work with what I had. So I used a lot of scrap materials that were left over from building projects around the house. And tools that I had at hand, with very few trips to local hardware stores for odds and sods. I wanted to make a robotic telescope from inexpensive parts. You can build a robotic telescope and easily spend about $30,000. That's roughly what I spent on my own Abbey Ridge Observatory back in the early 2000s. But I wanted something that could be cheap enough that could potentially be reproduced, and perhaps maybe in a few years, we'll see a few of them on the roofs of schools or that kind of thing. So I wanted to get the price down quite a bit and use commodity components. I also wanted to be able to have a development environment software-wise, so that when I'm working on new features for the Burke-Gaffney Observatory, I'm not working on a live production system. I'm working on a similar system that it's not a big deal if it just breaks in the middle of the academic term. And last but not least, the world is changing. CCD cameras were the in thing, like up to about a year ago, it seems. And the writing's on the wall. We're all switching to CMOS cameras, and this was an opportunity to learn a bit about CMOS cameras. So I bought one of those last spring again, with money left over from previous fiscal year, in a small enough amount that the boss wouldn't notice. So here's sort of a timeline. I'm not going to go through all of this, but back in 2013, our venerable old 16-inch, 40-year-old telescope, it was time to have it replaced, and we found some funding from a donor, and we ended up with about, I guess, total of about $200,000 to do some physical renovations and upgrades and new hardware and a new telescope and so on. And that's one of the things that I promised at the time to the donor, was that I would make this telescope accessible online on social media. And I made that promise, and I had to make good on it. So it took me about a year and a half, I guess, before the first version came out. And it was launched actually just at the General Assembly of the RASC that was held in Halifax in June of 2015. And through the years that followed, there's lots of improvements. We added, in addition to Twitter, which is a way you can communicate with it, we've added email and a dedicated app for Windows, Mac, and Android. You can now text it with the regular phones. You don't need really any service other than a cell phone. And more recently, because of COVID and the fact that students were no longer allowed on the campus, I came up with a live observing portal through a web browser, which I hope to demo tonight because it's clear outside. I see the moon up there out my window. Yeah, so I added a live portal so that we could give the students sort of some real live, using the telescope interactively rather than just submitting observations to a robotic queue. And more recently, I've actually added to the software stack, not to the mini robotic observatory, I've added the ability to actually do spectroscopy or take a spectrum of stars or nebulae or whatever through a web portal as well. And that actually has just come online in the last couple of weeks. And as you can see, it's been pretty active. Over the case of the Burke-Gaffney, we've had just crossed about 11,000 observations requests, and that could be as small as, or short as I should say, a snapshot of the moon to as long as 4 or 5 hours for an exoplanet transit observation. So that's a lot of observations over the last 5 or so years by nearly 900 observers around the world. And in fact, some Winnipeg Centre members have and are using the observatory on a regular basis, the Burke-Gaffney and the Abbey Ridge and the MRO. In particular, Scott Young and Gord Tulloch, and also Andrea Meisner's students for the last several years in her astronomy classes in high school have been using the Burke-Gaffney to take images for observing projects. I'm just looking to my left here to see what's going on with the telescope, because it's just in the process of starting up. As I mentioned a minute ago, I'm hoping to show you a live demo. It's always dangerous to do such a thing during a talk, but we'll give it a go. Okay, so let's get on with the show here. So again, the design goals were to come up with something inexpensive. What's inexpensive? I guess it depends on your budget, but sort of all in. So that's the enclosure, the cloud sensor, the computer, the camera, the telescope, the mount, all the robotic bits and pieces. Some are between 7 and 10,000, depending on what you choose for a telescope or a camera. And I wanted to be completely self-contained. So scope in a box, stick it in the back of a pickup truck, drag it to a star party, sit it out there, give it an internet connection, and off you go. And I wanted it to fit through a 32-inch doorway so that it would be able to be carried up a flight of stairs, out the roof, out a door onto a roof, or in and out of a classroom, or whatever you want to do. That was sort of a physical limitation that I set. And I wanted it to run exactly the same software that ran on the other 2 observatories, so that they would be, so that upgrades would be easy to do between there. And I've achieved that. They all run exactly the same software. Sometimes, there might be a few weeks ahead or a few weeks behind, but generally I try to keep them identical. And I wanted it to operate in a queue mode. So you submit an observation, it gets taken sometime later, and also live via the web at some sort of reserved time. So you could reserve a time, say I want it between 9 and 10 on next Thursday, and it would be available to anyone who requested that. So the software stack, I really haven't had a name for it until like last month when I was talking to the Kingston Center. I thought, I should probably give this a name. So I call it Mission Control for lack of a better name. You communicate with it with basically any communication method you might already be familiar with. Facebook Messenger, SMS text, email, Twitter direct message, and also a dedicated program or app for Windows, Mac, and Android. Don't presently have an iPhone app. I have it, but Apple is, I tell you, one of the most worst companies to deal with when you're a developer. it's difficult to meet their requirements. So at the moment, there is no iOS app. Hopefully that'll come back later. Okay, so how do you start? Well, you request authorization. So you basically send it a command, something like #authorize. Hi, I am Dave and I'm in Halifax and I like telescopes. And then that causes an email to be fired to me. And then I basically just send a command to the telescope to approve your account and you're off to the races. Even before that happens, you can start requesting images, but they won't actually happen until your account is approved. And each account can have different privileges. So you could have someone who could take longer exposures than others or have higher priority. So for example, we give our students higher priorities than a random observer that just requests from who knows where in the world. And I do get requests from all over the world, or requests for accounts, and we have not refused an account yet. So observation requests are received, validated. So the basic validation would be, don't pick something in the Southern Hemisphere. Has to be observable in the next 30 days. So don't pick something for the next season. And of course, it has to be visible within the latitude of, and reasonably observable, not hugging the horizon, that sort of thing from the location here in Halifax. And then once it's validated, it's stuck in a queue and it appears on the observatory's website. The queue, you can query it, change, edit your observations while you're waiting for them to happen. You can check the observatory status, what's the weather like, all kinds of things. It interacts with you in that way. While it's observing, it tweets messages sort of live as it's chugging along. It acts like a person. It sort of talks in first person. And it communicates with the observers as their images are being taken and sends them sort of snapshot images a few seconds after the images are taken. And it processes the images in the morning in a better way and sends a web link to where the images can be found on the website. All automatically, all with me doing nothing. But anyone who knows me, I've been automating observatories now since the ARO back in 2003, and my goal is to make myself obsolete. I don't want to have to tend to these telescopes. I can tell you it can be a bit of work when you got 3 robots that all speak to you with the same language, and it gets confusing, I must say, at times. Just looking over to the observatory, it is just about ready to start, just waiting to get a little bit darker. So looks like this demo might actually come off. Okay, so moving right along. So how you talk to this thing is through hashtags. So it recognizes about, 30 different commands that begin with the number sign, which in modern lingo they call a hashtag. And you give it commands like request, object equals the name of the object. And there's a whole raft of options. If you don't add any of the options, it will pick reasonable options. For example, it knows M42 is a nebula versus a galaxy. It'll do longer exposures for galaxies, shorter exposures for stars and star clusters. Like it's not AI, but it does look at what you request and come back with something that's reasonable, if you don't specify additional parameters. It's all documented on the website, and we all know nobody reads the documentations, but despite that, users do seem to have no issue figuring it out. I get very few, I can't make this work messages. It's quite surprising that that is the case. Except some of the advanced, features that researchers are trying to figure out. The communicator app, which is the way I generally communicate with it, even allows you to talk to it on the Android. You can speak to it and give it some commands, which is kind of cool when you're in the observatory dome, because you can say, go to object, M42, and the telescope will just move right on the fly. When you're in the dark there in the dome with people in the room. So that is quite popular. So this is a bit of a conversation, I guess, this is the Burke-Gaffney Observatory, but it's be the same with the Mini. So he asked the weather, it checks the cloud sensor. Whoops, very cloudy, very typical, I guess, here. Look up an object, M87, figures out where it is. Yes, it can be observed now. I request that object, set the exposure time and the filter. and it's in my queue, and request another object, and then say, well, what are my requests? There's 5, and it gives you a link to where your observations are. So mechanically, this is we started very modestly. I started working on the software first, and to make the software that was running on the Burke Gaffney and the ARO more adaptable, more flexible. Very few changes in the code, a bunch of just files that sort of specify the differences between the various telescopes. I initially just used the mount, which is an advanced Celestron AVX mount, and 4-inch Genesis telescope just on its regular tripod. You can see here in the bottom left, that's the computer and camera and the focuser and a few other things. That's the cloud sensor, just sitting on the deck. But that got a bit, I could really only put that out if there was no chance it was going to rain. And every time I put it out, I had to align it. So eventually I built it onto a piece of plywood and a garden cart and drug it outside. And that way, at least I could easily bring the thing assembled in and out from the basement to outside. But sometimes you have a setback. We had an accident. Luckily, it looks like this piece of wood here took the crash, and the telescope did not smash. Nothing broke. Thank goodness for that, because I doubt if I would have been able to get another telescope on short notice. So I used to set it up here on the deck again, but I would have to. With this case, I would actually throw a tarp over it. I'm in a rural area. I'm not too worried about someone coming and stealing the telescope. But eventually I got to the point where I had to design and build an enclosure. So I call this sort of a doghouse style observatory. It's sort of flips open on both sides. And I'll show you how that works in a second. I've got a little bit of a movie to show you. And again, it had to fit within a 32-inch door width, so that defines sort of the width of it. And I wanted it to be light enough that I could pick it up on one side with handles and stick it on a cart and move it around. Haven't actually done that, of course, since I put it outside here, because I haven't needed to move it yet. I might have some pushback in the summer because my wife kind of likes that deck, but we'll have to figure that out when that happens. So here it is in its completed configuration, a closed configuration, just painted wood, an access door, metal roof, and so far it's been pretty weatherproof. This is the cloud sensor. So I think I'm at the point now where I'm going to show you a video. I've got a 4-minute video that I took last November, just before I did the same presentation to the Toronto Centre. So let me see if I can get this to play here. Hopefully the sound will work. Okay, let's start by opening the roof. Let me know if that's not loud enough. Open Sesame. Takes a few seconds for it to check a few things before it starts to open.
I am opening the roof.
Okay, while it's opening, I'll just mention a few things. It sits on any flat surface. You just shim it to get it level. On the side, on the east side, there's an access panel that allows you to get inside in the event that the computer won't open the roof for you when you request it. There's a cloud sensor, which is separate. And it's oriented with the long direction in the north-south, and the shorter is east-west. So on my right here is the western direction. East is this way. The opening and closing is done by 4 linear actuators. And these have auto stops in them, so they run as far as they can and then they stop. And when closing, there's
magnetic switches here that are used to detect that the roof is in the closed position. Let's move the telescope. Go to Ring Nebula now.
I am moving the telescope to Ring Nebula at azimuth 95 degrees and altitude 56 degrees.
Okay, inside we'll find the telescope is a 4-inch Genesis refractor. I've had that telescope for nearly 30 years, and it's a great little telescope. On the back end, there's a CMOS camera from ZWO and an 8-position filter wheel that includes the regular red, green, blue luminance and the 3 narrowband filters. The mount is a Celestron Advanced BX, which is a pretty good mount at a really good price. So it fit well with this project. Other features you will find in here, let's move around to the other side. There is electric focus, Pegasus Astro focus cube. And over on this side is a relay controller used for turning things off and on, running the dew heater, and a USB hub, which can be controlled such you can individually turn on and off USB devices, which is an excellent feature when you're running remote and you need to reset something without rebooting the software. Under here is the computer. It's sort of a brick style computer, self-contained, includes everything that the observatory needs: a website, database, data storage, image processing, and a power supply here on the right, which essentially is just 12 volts. So this system could be run on 12 volts or 110 as I have it presently configured. And last but not least, this little device here is a ultrasonic sensor which detects the presence of the telescope above it. And that's just a safety feature to make sure the telescope is in its parked position before it tries to close the roof. Otherwise, the scope would not fit, and that would not be good. So we'll just end this brief video and we'll close the roof. Close sesame. And as part of that process, it recognizes that the telescope is not parked, so needs to be
I am closing the roof.
parked first and then closed. So I'll just walk away as it closes the roof.
Okay. Get rid of that. Okay, back to the presentation. Yeah, this is, I'm going to go through this just as kind of its specs. What's changed actually since that video was recorded? I've switched the filters around. Now include what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is not correct because I actually have. Scott could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I actually have in there BVI or BVRI now. So I have the photometric filters that you can use for science-based observations added to it. But the sort of spec list, you know, there's I've already talked about that in the video, but it's pretty nice little package. So, and the field size is about with a 4-inch f5 telescope. The full size is about 2 by 1.5 degrees. So that's a beautiful field of view, and the pixel size is about 3 arc seconds. So it's not too coarse a resolution, and gives you a beautiful large field of view, which the teleview refractors are known for. Okay, let's have a quick little demo of the computer communicator app and how you talk to it. I'll just drag it over here. This is just a Windows app that I've got here. And like any Windows app, you can kind of, you know, drag it around, change its format. So I could say, well, what's the status and it'll come back and say, I am observing queued observation request. It's actually sitting waiting for the demo of the live imaging demo, which is just to my left here, so it's ready for me there. But we could also, as for part of planning, we could say, what's the status of the sun today? And what that means is just, you know, what time will it start to observe tonight? How long is the night? And that I use that for planning, knowing when the telescopes will wake up at different times of the year. We can also ask for weather forecast. It reaches out to Environment Canada and parses the weather forecast and extracts the weather forecast for the next evening and the following day, I think it is, the first 24 hours. And I could also say, well, let's just request an object. So we're going to say, if I can type this, request object equals moon. And it will figure what, it knows what exposure you use for the moon and sticks it in the queue. And we could also say, let's do object equals, say, M51, but we want a blue filter. So we're going to say filter equals blue. And we're going to say exposure URE equals 900 seconds. Done. So that's as easy as it is to submit an observation, and I could go over to my go over to the website and say, show me my requested observations. And it will bring up a little web browser here. It actually tells me my live observation, which is in process, and I have 2 observations queued. I can go back and see what else is in the queue. This is the stuff that's in the queue from other observers. I have 2 principal observers, a fellow in Russia and a fellow in Spain who's using it for, both are using it for science observations. So that's kind of how you talk to it. And you can send these same commands through Facebook Messenger, email, text. Well, actually, all of those are not available on the MRO, but the software is capable of it. I just don't have Facebook or a text set up on this little guy. And messages, that's your record of your conversation. So I can just update all my private messages, and it'll look and see all the messages that it sends me reams of messages because I'm the operator. But the messages we just sent, the 2 from are all there. Plus anything it says on its public Twitter feed, you can also see that as well, without having to actually go to Twitter. So once you sign up, you don't really need to use anything other than just the app, and everything is there for you. Okay, let's move along. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the features that I really wanted to take on last fall for the purposes of COVID and creating some interactivity for the students is live observing, scheduled live observing. So you determine a time window you want to observe, you request it in advance, and when that time comes up, it sends you a message saying, hey, I'm here waiting for you, come and connect. And that's how it works. And I want it to be accessible from just a web browser. So anyone in the world, no special software, just an internet connection and web browser. And that went online, I guess, in September or in the summer last year, and used by the students in September. One of the things that we can see using this for is also for public outreach, because if you want to do remote public outreach, you can, without people coming to the observatory. If you've ever watched one of these sort of live remote observing and watch someone's screen and see all the multitude of programs that are behind the scenes, it's a real mess. And I wanted to hide the complexity of what's happening behind the scenes into a very simple interface that not only is quite flexible, but also doesn't allow the observer to really muck with the things and potentially break the telescope or cause it to do something weird, or just, you don't want to let someone you don't know access something that gives them access that you really wouldn't want them to have access to. So this sort of separates them from the nuts and bolts of the real telescope. So this is a screen capture from last fall, I guess, of several students and our telescope operator facilitating a live session. So how does this all work? Well, that's the subject of another presentation, but suffice to say, it's fairly complicated. This is a block diagram of all the various bits and pieces that make up the observatory. Some of these boxes are hardware, for example, the Pegasus Optics focus cube or the camera and the filter wheel. Some of these are software. Most of the blue boxes are software components that I've written to make this all work. And in doing so, I actually created a language called the Abbey Ridge Autopilot, which runs a language called Dave's Telescope Language, DTL. Would I do that today? Probably not. But at the time in 2003, when I started this, there really wasn't a language that would have led itself to be used for this kind of application. Today, that would probably be Python, but I'm not about to rewrite everything that I've written over the last, 17 years. So just a few examples of what's come out of this little telescope in the last, I guess, nearly a year. It came online back in, I guess, April, May last year. I've been really quite surprised, actually, how easy it is to get nice images. This image was taken by an amateur astronomer, Simone Belzoni, he's near Milan, Italy, and he's a regular user. He just stumbled upon it one day on the internet and uses actually all three telescopes. Has a lot of fun. So this is obviously M45. There's an image taken through the luminance red, green, and blue filter, something short of an hour. The other thing that's unique about this telescope is this telescope system is you can not only take images, but you can image process as well. So you can send it commands to do things like color combines, stretches, crops, mirror image, color adjustments, stacking, all of these sort of common things that you might need special software for, you can do entirely from the social media command set. This is the Coma Galaxy Cluster. I took this, I guess, about a month, 2 months ago, I guess, something like that, over several nights, about 1.3 hours, negative image. Almost every speck you see here is a galaxy. I plotted all the galaxies in my planetarium software and added them all up, and I checked every single one of them is there. There are over 520 galaxies on this frame. It's pretty awesome for a 4-inch telescope. This is a zoom up of the center part with the main galaxies in the middle, and virtually every speck on this image is a galaxy, probably the size of the Milky Way or even larger. Pretty awesome. Again, Simone from Italy took this image of the Mercurian's chain in the Virgo cluster. Again, this is about an hour-and-a-half exposure in 4 filters. Here's another one, beautiful image of color image of M67. But we can do science too. This is an image taken just a couple of days ago, actually, of the new nova in Nova Cas, which I guess has been around for what, a month or two now, a couple months, and it's recently become brighter. So the nova is this object there, and there's a few other deep sky objects in the same field of view. That's one of the nice things about having a 1.5 degree field of view is you get a beautiful field size. The bubble nebula comes out quite nicely there, as you can see. He's also submitting observations. I guess there are 4 filters, the BVRI, which are the photometric science filters used commonly around the world. And since early April, he's been observing that object probably every clear night that the telescope is run, and you can see it's brightened up quite a bit in the last week. So even that little telescope can do science. And in fact, we got a nice, oops, here's another one, Andromeda Galaxy. I shot this back a couple of months ago. This is about, I think it's about an hour's exposure in color. Here's an interesting observation. In the Andromeda Galaxy, somewhere in this image is a nova. A nova in the Andromeda Galaxy. So a star that not a supernova, but a nova that erupted 2.5 million light years away. And here's a before and after image. So that tiny little speck you see there on March 6th was not there on earlier on March 6th. So it blew up in between this day difference. Yeah, I guess that's less than a day. It became visible. Now, we did not discover it. In fact, this observation was taken by my Russian friend who's using it for lots of science projects. He noticed this, or actually more likely, I was taking these images, whoops, go back, this image of M31 and was paying no attention to it. The nova was announced. He went back through my images and found the before after, and then he prepared a submission to the IAU to note that we actually had a pre-discovery image, which is kind of cool, again, for a 4-inch telescope. Collaboration is the way to go. I like running and building and programming telescopes. I like to do observations too, but I have to be realistic. I'm not very good at it. Well, I'm good at it, but I'm lazy and I don't get around to the processing. But I do like running the telescopes for the benefit of others. It's really cool to have people around the world, using your telescopes in your backyard or the one I look after for work, and doing useful things or just having fun. So we're right at the end here. I guess I've been at it here for about 40 minutes. And perhaps if anyone has any questions, maybe we could insert those into kind of the live observation. That will work too. What I did earlier today is I sent this command to the telescope. I said, request a special observation live for 3 hours, 180 minutes at a time, local time today at 2200 within an hour's time, and priority 100, which basically means I'm going to get the time. I don't have to compete with anyone else. So I'll just move my web browser over.
Today,
and, yep.
One question is, does this setup use a guide scope and camera?
It actually does not. It takes short exposures and stacks them. So if you take a 15-minute exposure, it will take 10 1-minute exposures and combine them. And as part of that process, you can't, but the software has a setting that sets the sub-exposure time. So depending on how good your mount is, you could make that sub-exposure longer or shorter. And in the morning when it does its processing, it looks at each frame and grades them and tosses out the ones that are maybe a little blurrier or have a little bit of bad tracking or maybe had a cloud pass through, so that it throws out the bad frame. So you, generally speaking, get a decent image. And while it's a trade-off, it's quite difficult to do auto guiding robotically. Although I'm working on it.
Okay, the next question was, how does one measure magnitude? As in, what equipment is required for one scope?
Okay, so most people measure magnitude by using stars of known magnitude. So there are standard stars. So when you observe a star that you don't know the magnitude of, you observe another star, usually in the same field of view, that has a known magnitude. And you measure the amount of flux or the amount of light in each of those stars, and then you can divide the two. So if you know the magnitude of the known star, you can determine mathematically the magnitude of the unknown star. That's the easiest way to do it, especially with crappy skies. So this is the web portal. It's the same application that you can run on your phone, or except that it is running within a website. And there's an extra menu that's there called Live Observation. And when I click that, it would have said you are ready to connect. Press connect. I already did that. It's telling me I'm connected to a live session. I have 2 hours left or so. This tab is the status. So if I say update status, it'll query the telescope, azimuth, altitude, and knows what position it's at. It's on the west side of the meridian, where it's the west looking east. The roof is open, sky is clear, and the moon is 112 degrees away. Objects allows you to query the telescope. So I could say, look up M51, queries the telescope, finds its position. If I hit verify, it determines whether it's observable right now. Yes, it's high enough. And the object, it does not require a meridian flip, so it's on the same side of the meridian, and the moon is 86 degrees away, because you don't want to typically observe objects too close to the moon, because generally they'll be washed out. So now let's just try to actually observe an object. Let's see if we can get the moon. The moon is pretty low, but I'll try it anyway. So we're going to say search for the moon, and we're going to verify its position. It is 11 degrees up. That is not going to get above the deck wall, so we won't be able to observe the moon. So let's pick some other object. Let's try M44, which is the beehive cluster. Open cluster, verify position. It is 36 degrees. This object will require a meridian flip. Fine. Telescope, go. So now the telescope is moving, and this area down here is a status area that just sort of updates slowly what's happening. So it will start to move the telescope across the sky.
So maybe I can ask you one more question.
Sure.
Get a few in this queue there. So is the system equipped with a filter for imaging the sun?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It could be. In fact, if you actually try that, if you go over to request here, you can use this software to request objects too. I could say request object equals sun, and it will reply with, I cannot observe the sun without frying myself. So it rejects the sun.
Okay.
So our
go ahead.
position is there. And so now we flip over to imaging, and let's just take a very quick snapshot of that. So we'll take a 10-second exposure. Let's just take it through the LUM filter, and we'll do it full size. So the snapshot takes a picture without saving it. So it'll take 10 seconds. And again, this could be done anywhere in the world. This is in my backyard, but I'm actually connected to a website at St. Mary's, which is getting routed back through my cable internet. You could be anywhere in the world logging in once you have an account. Creates a JPEG, pops it up, bang. You have an image of M42. And if we click, we can get bigger. And one of the things that I spent a lot of time on in the early days was making recognizable images from just about anything. If you've done any astroimaging, you'll know that it's you generally have to do stretches in order to be able to set the black appropriately and set the white and the contrast and the stretch in order to get a nice looking image. It does this automatically for these quick shot images. The raw data is always saved, so you can always go back and use the original raw data files to do your own image processing, but often what you get out of the system right off the bat is really not that bad. So if we want to take a longer image, we would say we could go to this bottom section and we would take a longer exposure and again choose the filter and take the image. And if it was out of focus, we could do an autofocus. But but I won't do that. Let's go to and try one other object. Let's try a globular cluster. So we'll go back to objects. Maybe while I'm doing this, you could, if there's another question.
Yes. Have you published plans for building the doghouse structure?
I have not. I do have drawings that I need to update, but I do hope to do that because I think it would be useful to people. It's quite. I mean, I'm not a woodworker. I am a hack. I can use a table saw and a jigsaw and a paintbrush, but that's about it. So it doesn't take a lot of skills to be able to build it, and it wasn't expensive. It literally was made out of 1/4-inch underlay left over from when we built this house. So I would like to do that, and I'll put it on my list to try to do that. I'll probably publish it in the RASC journal, I suspect.
Okay.
So it's found M3, which is a globular cluster in, is it in Booties or is it just across the border? I can't remember. Declination 68 degrees. Great. So we'll go that, go to that. You see there's other functions here related to the telescope. You can do an auto sync. What that does is takes a short image, finds the stars, compares them to a database, and finds the position of the field and resyncs the telescope. And that just improves the pointing position.
I got another question for you. Well, wait. Why is CMOS sensor tech becoming more attractive now than CCD?
There's two things driving that. The first is that's where the development money is going. So the technology that's going into digital cameras for consumer use and for phones and so on, there's literally billions of dollars of development going into that. So they're becoming quieter, less noisy. They're becoming less expensive. And on the other side, CCDs, there's not much development going on there now, and generally they're only niche markets. But the nail in the coffin happened about a year ago when the owner of the company that made most of the sensors used by amateur astronomers, the so-called Kodak chips, although Kodak that hasn't owned the company in probably 10 years or 15 years, they were commonly called the Kodak sensors. The manufacturer abruptly discontinued the entire line. So the manufacturers such as SBIG and so on were basically had the rug cut out from under them. So they have no choice. They have to use the CMOS sensors if they want to be in business. In some ways it's good. In other ways it's not, because the CMOS sensors are pretty good sensors, but they're not as good, in my opinion, in some ways, especially for science, as the CCDs. And part of that is just because we've gotten used to CCDs over the last 25 years, and we've become aware of their warts and have been able to get around them.
Okay, do you have time for another question? Oh, no, your image is coming up.
So that was just a 10-second image of M3. I'll just zoom in here so you can see. It's not bad. And if you wanted to take a longer exposure, you could say take a 120 second through LUM. We'll do a preview. We'll do it full size. I guess we don't need full size. We'll do it negative. And now what will happen this time is it will take the longer exposure. In this case, it would be two, as it's saying here, 2 subs of 60 seconds. And because I clicked the preview, it will again generate the JPEG so you can have a quick look at it. And it will then save those files on the hard drive, so that in the morning, what will actually happen is you would get a message from the telescope saying, that your entire live session is in this zip file. So all of the observations done in this session would all be combined together for one single download. And the file names would be recognizable in that they'd have the object name and whatnot in them.
Got time for a question?
Sure.
How long did it take you to write the software and debug the system? What language did you use? And what did you use for voice recognition? I'm very curious about that.
Okay, so most of the it all runs on a Windows platform. So most of the software is, most of the high level stuff is written in this language that I wrote myself created myself called Dave's Telescope language. And it's kind of a plain English language that doesn't really look like any other language. I tried not to use commands that were in other languages. But you know, it has a command like dome open, you know, park telescope, take image. So all the very things you want to do in astronomy, it has hidden all the complexity of that into simple English-like commands. And that's how a lot of the overriding, you know, high-level stuff is written in. All the low-level stuff is written in a language called Delphi, which is a commercial language. The language is actually Object Pascal, but it's something that I've been writing in literally for about 30 years. And it's something I'm very comfortable with, and it's a very rich language in the sense that not only can you write the low-level stuff that controls telescopes, but you can also write an app like this app here that runs in a web browser, runs on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, all from one set of programs. No changes. As far as the last question, I think was, what about the voice recognition? I leveraged the Google language. Google has it built into the Android system. So what you can do from a programmer is just trigger the box to come up that prompts you to speak, and then you can send that recording to Google, and it gives you back the text. So it's actually not that difficult from a programmer's perspective. And here we are, 2-minute exposure, negative image, so it shows a little better, live, taken outside, out the window here, with a tiny little 4-inch telescope. And you could be doing this from home. And actually mean that too. I mean, this telescope, anyone listening, feel free to request access. The website I can show at the very end of my talk. So that's pretty much the demo, I think, unless there are more questions. I see a few there that I probably scold by, might be comments.
The one
How long
that
did it take to write? I didn't say how long it took, did I? It's I had a lot of programs written to automate the ARO to do supernova searching. So that was kind of what I used to start creating this sort of robotic Twitter telescope. Probably about 1.5 years before the first version came out. But like anything, I can't stop working on it. So it just slowly is getting better incrementally. And it's becoming more fault tolerant. So it's less trouble. It's less of a troublesome robot than it might have been 3 or 4 years ago. But I have been working on it, not full time, probably, you know, a day or two a week for 4 or 5 years, maybe something like that.
The next question we had was, what is the magnitude resolution for variable star measurements?
Yeah, good question. Haven't really figured out what's practical limit with this little 4-inch guy. I suspect, you know, to get a 1% reading, which is what we typically variable star observers like, you really can't make measurements more accurate than with about 0.01 magnitudes, which is about 1%. Brightness, maybe 12th magnitude. I don't know. That might be a 10-minute exposure. I know that I've done with the BGO, with the 24-inch telescope in the city, I've done reasonable quality down to 15th magnitude. It really depends on how precise you want to be able to measure the stars.
The last batch that I used from MRO just yesterday was down around 9.5 magnitude, and it was 6 millimag, so 0.006 magnitude was the error.
Yeah, that's about what I would have expected. One of the things that CCDs, just to back to that question about why CMOS, what's happening there. CCDs typically have a minimum exposure time. So the ARO, which has a venerable, that's the one with the C14, has a venerable SBIG ST8 camera, which has been around for 20 years. And I've owned it for, actually, technically it belongs to St. Mary's University, but don't tell them that I've ordered it. It can only take 0.1 second exposure. So you really have to do weird things if you want to observe bright stars. So I really can't observe a 5th magnitude star without overexposing. But the MRO, the little guy, because its camera can do 0.001 second exposures, you can observe Polaris or Betelgeuse or whatever you want through it. And so there are advantages of having a small telescope and a camera that can take really short exposures, because you can observe really bright stars that you can't observe with larger telescopes.
The next question we had, is it difficult to align the mount to Polaris when you are setting it up after a move?
Absolutely a pain in the butt, especially because of how low it is there, and I just can't easily get my head down under the polar scope that's in there. It's and I will be the first to admit that it's not that accurate. And the reason I don't care that it's not that accurate is because of the auto syncing. The software is set up so that unless you're moving very far from the last synced object, it always does. In the automatic mode, in the robot mode, it's always resyncing the telescope. So the object is always in the center of the field of view, and also the field of view is quite large, so it really doesn't have to be that accurate. And I really haven't noticed any field rotation. So I must have a relatively accurate polar alignment, but not that accurate. That's one of the things that I find that a lot of astrophotographers really spend too much time on. It's really not that much of a problem unless you're shooting very long sub exposures.
And
yes.
Dave,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just, are you saying yes to you can image minor planets?
Yeah, I just looked at that last one. Minor planets, absolutely. The way the software is set up so that its database basically knows any object that's in my astronomy software, Earth Center Universe. So, that's basically any galaxy down to something like 18th magnitude, star clusters, nebulae, planets, the moon, obviously, and I always have the orbits, any objects going around the sun. I always periodically update the current comet, so it always knows how to find all the bright comets, and it knows how to find any asteroid that's brighter than about 17th magnitude. And if anyone wanted to find something fainter, then that could be added. But I basically just periodically update the elements. It can keep track of about 10,000 asteroids at any given point. And asteroids are fun because you can actually see them move from hour to hour and day to day. In fact, there are features within the software, so you can say something like request an object. I could say interval equals 0.1 days. Again, I picked the sun, which is a bad example, but if you picked an object and submitted observations, say 3 observations of an asteroid with an interval of 0.1, then you get 3 observations on the same night, separated by, in this case, 2 hours. I guess that'd be about 2.4 hours through the night. So you can space out observations by adding these extra options to your requests. Can I image Ultima Thule? Remind me of what Ultima Thule is.
It's one of those Kuiper belt objects, I think. I don't know how bright it gets.
I think somebody actually tried to observe that. Probably not with the ARO, but probably not with the little guy. But I'm finding people, it's fun to challenge things, right? To see what you can get. And sometimes we surprise ourselves. I took an image a couple of years ago of a double quasar and had no idea before that you can actually observe with a relatively small telescope a quasar that's 11 billion light years away with relatively small equipment. It's pretty cool. But no, I don't know the answer to that without knowing more about the object, what its brightness is. I am looking for, folks, institutions, clubs that actually want to run the software. I'm not looking to make money off of it. You do need to buy some software that's running under the hood to use it, but I want to see this thing used, and I have no intention of not continuing to develop it. It's pretty well documented on the user side. It needs a bit of work on the administrator side, documentation, but it should be pretty adaptable to just about any sort of modern hardware that runs ASCOM, telescopes, cameras, mounts, and that sort of thing.
All right.
10.4 absolute mag. That doesn't tell us too much because that doesn't know. Glad to, Gord. Thanks for the invite. Gord, thanks me for offering to present tonight. Why did I choose a doghouse style roof? Because I wanted to be cheap. There's probably only a couple $100 worth of wood. Well, actually, last year there would be $50 worth of wood. There's probably $400 worth of wood this year. But there's very little cost. The only real cost in the roof assembly is the labor, obviously, and the 4 linear actuators, which are good old Princess Auto, which means they're pretty cheap. So you can probably build the roof. Probably the materials for the entire roof system is probably less than $1,000, and I challenge you to find a dome that would fit that size telescope for less than a couple thousand, few thousand. They're DC powered electric 12-volt linear actuators. Do I have an auto lens cover the scope? No, I don't. I just haven't had that issue with the refractor. It's haven't had much issue with dust in this area. It is fairly sealed up, inside, not really, tightly sealed, but the roof is pretty contained, so I don't expect there's a lot of airflow inside there. Do I use a Gerd Newman cover for flats? Yes, I do. In fact, behind me here. This contraption is a electroluminescent panel, which I bought for another telescope, but I basically have a 4-inch. So whenever I just need to do flats, I didn't have enough room inside the dome to mount this inside the enclosure to mount this permanently. So I just built this little contraption that just slides over top of the end of the telescope, and I update the flats. Largely whenever one of the observers says, you got dust donuts in your image, can you update the flats for me? So I'll do that.
Dave, I think that's the last
question. Do you have anything else you'd like to wrap up with?
I just put up the last slide. I'm happy to have you folks use any of the 3 telescopes. The only thing I ask is that you use the data that you get, or you share it, or you have fun using the telescopes. There are 3 of them. and you're welcome to use any of them. There's probably more time on the Burke Gaffney and the mini robotic than on the Arrow, because the Arrow is doing science observations mostly these days. And for more information, you can go to observatory.spu.ca by itself. That takes you to the Burke Gaffney, and that's where all the documentation is. And /MRO is the page specifically on the mini robotic observatory. And that's all I have to say. I appreciate the invite again.
Well, Dave, on behalf of the Winnipeg RASC, thank you very much for tonight. It was very, very informative. And we obviously had lots of questions, so we really appreciate you coming with us tonight.
Really appreciate the questions. And one of these days, I'm going to make it out there to Winnipeg. I missed 2 GAs you guys ran, but one of these days, I'll visit you guys in person.
Sounds great.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
So what's going to happen now, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to see how we go about this next, Scott, to open it up for the next 10 minutes. I'll keep track of that with Scott. Just for a general discussion period. Again, everyone just understand this is an experiment, see how it can work. And with the hope that the next meetings we will have set up hosts for different breakout rooms for, astrophotography, sketching, whatever the case may be, or just a social room. So depending on how people want to do that. And that's kind of a hint that we're going to be looking for people who would like to host. If you would like to host a room, please drop an email to president@RASC Winnipeg. And so we know who might be interested in hosting a room, and we can let people know in advance what might be available. So Scott, how does this work now?
Well, that's a great question. So basically at this point, it is a free-for-all. You can all unmute your microphones, and this becomes a big discussion. If you go over to the top right corner where it says view, you can switch it from speaker view to gallery view, and that way at least you can see, well, in my case, I can see 25 people. I don't think you can get everybody on the screen. I guess it depends on how many monitors you have, perhaps. And yeah, it's basically like it would be at an in-person thing. If someone's talking, wait till they're not talking, and then jump in.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, Judy.
It's just great to see everybody.
There's
Yeah,
an
isn't it?
image of the sun
Good to
using
see you
my
too.
iPhone.
Yeah.
Nice.
Here's my obligatory dog barking, Judy.
Okay.
There we go.
Hi, Catherine.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
Sylvia and
Good to see you.
Hey, Sylvia.
Hey, everybody. So good to see you.
Yeah. Hey, Mike.
Hi, Stan.
Mike.
Hi. Hey, Lucille, I like the soft light image you've got there.
That's just a crappy camera, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, Stan, great talk. Really like that.
I tried to make sure it was beginner talk.
Yeah, it was really good. My level.
Yeah, I like it. Have to borrow the camera, telescope.
Yes.
That's right.
And thankfully, Sylvia had that nice drawing just from this week. So it's just showing you how the sun is really becoming active, which is really nice these days.
Yeah.
I've never seen it this active in like so long. I think when I first joined the RASC is the first time that I saw it through Ed Rashford had a telescope just like the one that you have there, Stan, and I was looking at the prominence. But after that, I've never seen it so active again. Till now, it's like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Really neat.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Yourself?
Not bad.
Who
Feels
else?
like somebody dodging in the background.
Yeah. Steve doesn't want to be seen, I think.
Nope, he's hiding. He should be hiding with his hair.
Oh, there he is.
That's okay. Your image is this little. We can't. see
Okay,
it.
good.
Looks pretty good.
Wow.
So I think we have a couple of guests tonight from far away other than Dave. Benedict, you're from Montreal, right?
I was going to ask.
Where's Benedict?
I'm muted.
Muted. And who else? Anybody else from not in Winnipeg?
That's cool.
What's Dave doing? Swatting a fly?
Pretending
Roy here from Thunder Bay.
I was swatting a moth, but I was thinking it might have been a Winnipeg mosquito.
No, it would have been bigger. Brendan, you said you're from Thunder Bay?
Thunder Bay.
Nice.
Welcome.
Welcome.
They can drive and see the annular coming up.
Yeah.
Are you going? Who's the one from?
Oh, the annual. What's the date on the annual?
June 10th. Yeah.
June 10th.
Yeah, we can't cross the border.
June 10th every year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll all have to sit at the border crossing and watch.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm working on a charter right now for a bunch of people. So we fly and watch it if I can get it organized.
Right there.
I would say that would be a deemed essential activity.
You think?
So is there any plans to go anywhere? Like, can we see it from?
I'll cover it on WhatsApp.
We'll see a partial eclipse.
Yeah, it's an early morning partial.
And the lunar.
Everybody's voices coming.
Oh, some feedback somewhere.
Dan, I think you need to mute.
I was just about to identify myself because you were asking who's from away from the country, from Winnipeg. It's I'm in Edmonton. So Dan and Kim Kulak, Edmonton. Jay Anderson knows us. It's our first time tuning into a Winnipeg meeting.
Oh, great.
Welcome.
Hey, welcome.
Welcome.
We were wondering who actually was coming in from outside of Winnipeg. We did post the ad for this in the national site. Is that how you found another way?
Let's turn off the outside audio here. Maybe the feedback will disappear now. Yes, I saw it through the RASC newsletter, the national email list. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
And I've been trying to tune into some of the meetings around the country, the Zoom meetings, etc., because we're all locked down. So trying to tune into Calgary and Winnipeg and whoever else I can find on a night.
Okay.
Nice.
That's super. Yeah. Welcome.
Go to a RASC meeting every single night of the week.
Yeah, pretty much.
Really?
Get a life.
Yeah.
What about astronomy?
Has to be clear for that.
Yeah, as long as it's cloudy nights.
So, Gord,
There's a website for that.
You're making your scope remote, right? Gord?
Well, yeah, I was really interested. That's actually what reminded me that Dave was doing this kind of stuff, is that it's likely that I'll take my 10 by 10 roll-off roof shed and compress it down to a 4 by 4 micro observatory that I can test in my backyard and then move somewhere dark.
I think it would be cool to do Glenley like that, and we could really let just about, everybody could use it. Right?
Yeah, well, as Dave said, his software is available, so that all of the back end stuff is all standard, like Maxim DL and all that kind of stuff. So it's just the software to glue it all together and can make it available to people. So yeah, definitely that's a possibility. We've already kind of costed it out, and it's within reach of the club if we wanted to go that way. But we'll finish the strategic plan and go from there.
Does Glenley have an internet connection there? Or?
Well, the university has one. We could probably find a way to use it if we shared some resources with them.
Yeah, apparently we haven't talked to the university about anything since 1996, so we're waiting a little while before we actually open any discussions with them. The other possibility is something like Starlink. I know that's a dirty word, but
Might as well get some benefit out of this stupid thing.
Yeah, it's like cutting your nose off to spite your face if you say you won't use it, right? It actually works really well.
Our
There's,
agreement with the university
there's an
ran
amateur-
out in 1996, so don't open that can of worms.
I told them that about the needle.
There's an amateur astronomer who just moved from, I think he's one of those multiple cities east of Toronto into a rural area that doesn't have high-speed internet, and he's rebuilding his observatory there, but he also just signed up for Starlink, and he's gonna give it a good whirl. But I guess if you can't beat him, can't fight him, join him, I guess.
One of my staff who's up in Powerview, Manitoba, which is up by the lakes, he's had it for about 2.5 months, and it's working really, really well for him. And it's still in beta, really. So they're still making adjustments. So it's going to really blow the lid off remote, or I should say, rural internet big time, because it's a big problem getting internet in the rurals.
Well, they're in for south of Winnipeg here. There's terrestrial-based wireless companies too that you actually get pretty good service. I know I'm out in Lorette here, and we used company in Steinbach, Swift, and we're getting really good, reliable service from them. That was all wireless too. So.
Yeah, we actually have a quote from Swift, but we'd have to put a tower up at Glenley, and it's quite expensive. Well,
Okay.
Comparatively expensive. It's not out of reach, but
yeah, they charge about $300 or something for.
That was about $1,600 to put the tower up.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
I saw them go by this week, and I thought that they were talking about dimming that color because they're so bright. But it didn't look like they were dimmed at all. But they did say that they changed something about them so that they wouldn't be so bright, didn't they?
They did, but it didn't really make much of a difference.
No.
I think that they're still as bright as they were. In fact, the last batch that just came over was incredibly bright.
Yeah. I was so surprised. I was looking, okay, there's the Big Dipper. And then I thought, whoa, I'm getting dizzy. Felt like I was in a time lapse or something because everything was moving.
I've been using my Polar Master alignment scope, which, Dave, you need to get for your little telescope because that would save you from cricking your neck.
Yeah.
But I've been using that, and there's been satellites passing through that camera. Every time I use it, I see satellite after satellite after satellite passing through. They all must be on polar orbits, but there's a lot of bright satellites that pass through Polaris.
I'm beginning to think about
I don't know where
what will be inevitable, and that is when robotic telescopes will have to predict what satellites are about to pass through the field of view and are going to have to pause or avoid or dodge
schedule around it.
Yeah.
Well, usually you can process them out, but it's getting like you're losing a lot of subs, right?
Yeah. The bigger your field, the worse it would be, I guess.
So folks, we want to just try this tonight, and that was 10 minutes. How, just generally speaking, before we switch back to the meeting, what's the feeling? Do you like what we did here? Would you like to see it try to go into breakout rooms? Heads nodding.
Why not?
Sounds good.
Okay,
It's a great idea.
so we're looking at it. So we'll get it worked well tonight. So we'll see what we can develop from here. So appreciate everybody doing that. So Scott will try to move it back into the meeting mode where we mute everybody, and I'll try and get my screen up to do the next introductions. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
I'm probably going to drop off, folks. It's about 11 o'clock here in Halifax. So thanks again for the invite, and we'll see you on the other side, wherever that is.
Okay, great. Good to see you, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll be talking, Dave.
No,
Thanks,
sure.
Dave.
Bye.
Okay, so it looks like we're back on here. There we go. So announcements, just go through a few things, bring everybody up to speed. We are still moving towards incorporation. And as we mentioned, tonight's a good example. Lots of talk about what we could do with a remote telescope. One of the big things about incorporation is it allows us to go for funding and for different areas. And so that's an important thing that we're being worked on by the council. The bylaws, we have first draft. Once very shortly, we're going to start sharing it with people to give you an idea of what the changes are and how we see things operating. And the bylaws go hand in hand with the operations manual. And with that, the strategic plan, which was mentioned earlier by Gord, the mission, vision, and values are starting to shake out very nicely, as well as a lot of the feedback to give us an idea of what the membership would like to do. And I'd like to thank everyone who's participated in the surveys that have happened to this date, and just expect to see more probably at our next meeting. We hopefully have a little bit more to share on that. Mentor program, we are recruiting volunteers, and we have a position that we started, an interim volunteer coordinator, and Judy has volunteered to be that till the end of this year. And that person is coordinating our mentors, the beginner sessions, and hopefully at some date when we go to do public outreach. And really, she's going to coordinate the volunteers. In the case of the mentor program, try to pair up a mentor with who's expressed certain types of areas they'd like to work with when we get a request from one of the members to actually learn something or assist them with a scope or whatever the case may be. So we're very excited about being able to move that forward. Again, we're still working with NCC, but of course, with all the COVID restrictions, it's very difficult to do anything practical at this point. The NCC is working locally in the communities to get them all on board, and there seems to be very successful in that coming forward. We have the Youth Outreach Scout Camp out in September. There's information on the forum, and again, if you want more, you could contact Gord Tula. Public outreach, as I mentioned, is limited. So for instance, Astronomy Day, the only thing we've done is promoted looking at what the Manitoba Museum, in particular what Scott's doing, for outreach as Astronomy Day is tomorrow. Glenlee programs, right now there's nothing being set up, but the hope is as the COVID restrictions reduce, we will start running actual programs out at Glenlee, depending on different people's interests. And there may be 1 or 2 programs going on at the same time, depending on interest. Sprucewood Star Party, September long weekend. The more we hear from the government, the more it sounds like this is likely to happen. So please put it in your calendar and plan for it. And Sylvia and her team are the ones taking care of that. We went through the beginner session, breakout rooms, and the break. We saw how that worked tonight, so the break in particular, so we'll move that forward. I'm going to talk about the other 2 things and then come back to our awards. So the COVID, the pads at the Glenlee are now open to 5 people maximum. Information's on the forum, and that's just in compliance with the provincial health orders. I'd like to announce that the council has appointed Mike Stevens and Mike Caracas to positions as counselors. So we welcome them on board, and we certainly can use their help as we move through some of the different things we've already talked about: bylaws, operations manual, strategic planning. And if you see them, please congratulate them on taking the time to volunteer with us. Really cool announcement: Manitoba Schools Science Symposium, which RASC Winnipeg Centre has always sponsored for a great long time. The winner this year was Thompson Neal. He's from grade 4, and he did a presentation on what if the sun vanished. And Brendan was the person who was evaluating the awards and said it was really invigorating. He had a lot of really good questions. If we're able to, we hope that to convince him, because he is in grade 4, to come and talk a little bit about it, what he's done in one of our meetings. So I'm going to come out of stop sharing for a second. And just curious, has it stopped sharing? Can't tell. The reason I want to stop sharing is announce our 2020 Service Award winner this year is Sandy Suchak. and it was to recognize his efforts in promoting the creation of a dark sky career for Spruce Mills Provincial Park. The members of the Winnipeg Centre will be able to appreciate the fruits of his efforts for many years to come. Hopefully you can see that, because I can't really see for whatever reason what my screen looks like. So that is our 2020 Service Award. Our 2020 Achievement Award, who was on earlier, is awarded to Sheila Wichar to recognize her continued excellence on the art and science of astrophotography. Her efforts inspire members of the Winnipeg Centre to both appreciate the wonders of the universe and to better their own skills based on her example. Again, this is the award we've now put up. Hey, I see some, now my screen had to show things. Yay!
Hey, congrats.
And we'll make a point of getting those framed and brought to them. But what I want to show you out at Glenlee, I don't know, can you see this very well, Scott? Yeah, so this is what the awards will look like. They'll go up with the other awards for the winners from the previous years. But this is what the format's going to look like.
Nice.
So this is the one for Outstanding Achievement. Again, Sheila, congratulations. And again, Outstanding Service. Congratulations, Sandy. Thank you very much for all the work you do for the center. Yay! You got her. Can't remember what I got up next. Well, what I'm going to do is introduce you, Jay. And we'll move over for Jay to now talk about what's up. And we all know Jay. He's a longtime member, meteorologist, Bachelor of Science in Astronomy and Physics. And he's the one that's going to talk to us now and tell us what's up. Please welcome Jay.
Okay, hello everybody. Oh, look at that glowing color I'm in thanks to the lighting around here. Well, I guess we'll just have a look at sharing the screen here. Speak to me. Here we go. And we'll just send that up. Here we are with a nice little image of M67 I took last month. Anyway, May, June, we're starting to get some interesting things happening. It's been kind of a bit of a drag on observing for the last 2 sessions of what's up, but now as the night is disappearing, we're starting to get some planets that are up and a few other little goodies. So here's what's happening in terms of daylight. This is a chart that shows you the amount of daylight, the amount of various kinds of twilight, and the amount of night that we have. And the 2 vertical yellow bars that you see here is essentially from now until a month from now. And you'll notice that there is almost no night left anymore, but we do have some astronomical twilight, and that almost disappears completely up here when we get to the end of June and then starts to come back. So you can actually do imaging through astronomical twilight, but nautical twilight and civil twilight are different matter. And these are all defined by how far the sun is below the horizon. Essentially, civil twilight is when you have to turn your car lights on, and nautical twilight is, I don't know, can't sail anything unless it's brighter than that. No, that's not the case. But anyway, this little blip on each end is the daylight saving time switch. So anyway, kind of limited to not much time that you can do any observing through these hours here, right up close to solar midnight, which, because we're on daylight time, would actually be 1 o'clock in the morning. So here it is on the bottom, some of the actual amounts. So right now we have about 3 hours and a half. By the end of May, we're down to 42 minutes, and it disappears very, very quickly as you get into June, although I don't think the site I use has quite got it right. It's got 14 minutes on June the 1st and June the 2nd, it's all gone. So we lose it quickly. However, Mother Nature is not leaving us in the lurch. Here's the sun from yesterday with 2 nice sunspots on it. So the sun is getting more active. And the graph you see there is a graph of the activity from May 12, 13, and 14. And you can see we had an enormous spike, KP index getting up to 7 on the night of the 12th to 13th. And that was a very interesting night, which I'll show you in a minute. So sunspots and borrowing the camera from Stan to look at the hydrogen alpha is probably the thing to be doing for the next month and a half or 2 months. Now, because we're seeing a lot more of an increase in solar energy, I mean, take a look at the chart here. We've seen this just about every one of these presentations, but it looks like solar activity is actually increasing fairly substantially quicker than the predicted values in here. Recall last month I mentioned that a new study of the solar cycle predicted that the one coming up was actually going to be one of the strongest ones that we've seen. So we have a bit of a competition between the traditional methods, which give us this curve here, and the newer one, which would actually peak pretty close to the top of this chart. And certainly the level of activity that we've seen in the last 6 or 7 months suggests that we're coming up fairly strongly. So on the night when we had that KP7, I took this picture. And the aurora itself, all of this green, was bright, but it wasn't particularly interesting in the sense that it didn't have a lot of curtains and things like that. There's 2 things that are noticeable. First of all, there was a lot of red above the aurora. But even more was this structure, this arc that comes across here. And I think that this would be what's known as the stable auroral red arc, a SAR arc. And it's sort of like a cousin to Steve, but not quite. So remember Steve, the phenomenon we talked about last week, which we saw a month ago. So this is a different bird, so to speak, in the nighttime auroral sky. This exposure is quite long. It says 3 minutes, but this is actually a 30-second exposure. I do have 3-minute exposures of this, but it certainly colored everything. When you start seeing these things, you've never seen this before. I had never seen a Steve phenomenon before. And now all of a sudden we're knocking them off in 2 successive months. It means that our traditional take a look at the aurora on a good night might be extended to looking at other structures that might be showing up. So even though the nights are disappearing, you can still watch aurora like this, even with only astronomical twilight. And of course, aurora peak best at about 1 o'clock in the morning when the sky is darkest. Plus, you're looking north, which is not a good direction to be looking because that's where the sun is at night. So the sky, taking this out of Carte du Ciel, and it just shows you basically the constellation pattern for this evening. There are a couple of noteworthy things. We have a horizontal Milky Way, so if you want to go shoot the sky off toward the east side here, you get your Milky Way lying down on its side, and at least for a time, it gets up a little higher. The previous image that we have shows the Milky Way climbing up through here. So, but there is a time when it runs parallel to the horizon, which makes for some interesting photography if you want to take a 30-second or so exposure with a wide-angle lens. Virgo's galaxies, which we've talked about before. This is the zenith line, this white one, and here are all the Virgo galaxies, you know, the brightest ones in red here. But we also have some of the Ursa Major galaxies up in here, another big cluster, M81 and 82 off to the side. And we have the Leo galaxies, which are also fairly high. So these are all distinct galaxy clusters that are worth exploring, especially in the middle of this one. It's so easy to find galaxies, much harder to identify them though. If we go a month forward, you can see that galaxies, and now this one's later at night. This is at 1 a.m. The previous one was at 10 p.m., but we don't have any darkness anymore at 10 p.m. on June the 14th. So it went a little later, and you can see Virgo galaxies are sort of descending off into the western horizon here now. Ursa Major's swinging around to the west side of the pole. But we got some of the stuff from now coming up from the summer Milky Way, and particularly got the globular cluster M13 in here, and we've got M57, the Ring Nebula, in here. So these are all nice and high in the sky at 1 in the morning. So they're kind of brightish targets that you might want to look at either visually or photographically. The other thing that's interesting is ahead of Scorpius. Now, Scorpius is a tough one for us. One of the most beautiful constellations, actually, in a bit of a longer exposure, but it doesn't get very high here. It's due south at 1 o'clock on June the 14th, which means it's at its maximum altitude. And I think Sheila sent a picture out of the Scorpius area today that some of you may have seen, but even though it's low down, it photographs beautifully at a bit of a time exposure. And of course, there's a sort of perennial target up in here, the North American Nebula. Difficult to see with binoculars, although it's big enough, but there's so many stars up in here that the nebula gets kind of camouflaged by all of the stars sitting there in the middle of the Milky Way. But it's worth trying in a dark sky to see if you can spot that outline of the North American Nebula. I don't have to tell you what it looks like. Planets, well, Mercury and Venus are both pretty good right now. They're both in the western sky. I'll show a picture of that in a minute. And Mercury is coming up to its farthest point from the sun, which means that it's in the darkest part of the sky in the evening before it begins to set. But after the 18th, it's going to start slinking back to the horizon, and probably by the 1st of June or first few days of June, it'll be too close to the sun to see anymore. Magnitude 0 right now, but it loses it as we get in toward June. But if you want to see Mercury, now is the time to do it. And because Venus is also down there, Venus and Mercury together, Venus is really bright, magnitude -4, as you can see. And so Mercury for the next few days is above it, and then it'll be beside it. Mars is still there. It's not particularly bright, but it's still a nice reddish color if you're in a dark sky, so it's easy to recognize. And then in the morning, we have Jupiter and Saturn, which are gradually getting farther and farther away from the sun, but they're coming out from the sun at a fairly low angle, so they don't get too high up in the sky. They will be getting higher as you get into June, and when they get higher than that, then telescopes get a much better view of them. Uranus is moving into the sun, and Neptune is low in the morning, getting up higher in the sky. If you want to go chasing it down, then it's certainly possible. But it really benefits a lot more from being up very high in the sky, which will take later in the year to get there. So here's what they look like. Here's tonight, Venus and Mercury are positioned like this. But when we get up to June the 10th, you can see, well, let's just say that by the 18th, Venus will have been moving up right in here beside Mercury. By June the 10th, Mercury is gone. But Venus and the moon are together in the sky on June the 10th. A nice little combination. And for the morning sky, this is the approximate arrangement of Jupiter and Saturn. They're about 15 degrees apart right now, and they'll increase to 18 degrees apart. Both of them are moving higher up in the sky along the line of the ecliptic here. So you can see the ecliptic in the evening sky comes up very sharply. So Venus and Mercury move along at a fairly high angle away from the horizon. But down here in the morning, where it's at a low angle, Saturn and Jupiter don't climb high in the sky until another half dozen or dozen years have gone by, and they get into a different part of the ecliptic. Pretty pictures. We've got the moon next to Mars on May the 15th. We have a partial solar eclipse on June the 10th. 36 minutes after sunrise, which is at 5:20. This is approximately what it'll look like at 5:36 in the morning. So it's 15 minutes after sunrise. I don't know where this mountain is, but you'll have to go find that. Maybe that's Juba Mountain there, the old dump north of Polo Park. And then we have the moon under Jupiter and Saturn. That's a kind of so-so thing. However, this Mercury and Venus side by side, here's the image of them here on the lower right. So this May 28th, I guess I said 18th, May 28th, 9:36. Brightness is creeping on there, and it's not very dark, but both of them should be bright enough to be easily seen. Find Mercury with binoculars when Venus isn't beside it, but on a night like that, should be able to see them easily by eye, or Mercury especially. And then June 11, we get Venus and the moon together. They're only 2 degrees apart. This little picture down here. Again, 10 p.m., it's a pretty bright sky, but those are both two
Right
pretty
after the
bright
eclipse.
objects.
The lunar
If
eclipse.
you wanted to see my sidekick's giving me hints. If you want to see the eclipse, this is where you have to go. You have to be inside this line here, the solid line, or certainly inside the dashed line. This is where the eclipse ends at sunrise. So between this line and this line, the eclipse is underway as the sun rises, and then beyond here, the eclipse starts after the sun has risen. So you could take the Trans-Canada, if travel's allowed, and go past Terrace Bay and in through Marathon to White River. So you could get into this section and watch an annular eclipse of the sun very low. Or you could take the northern branch of the Trans-Canada up through here and watch the eclipse of the sun a fair bit higher in the sky. It's a bit of a challenge. And of course, Ontario would have to open up for travel. And that's 2 days out because Thunder Bay is here. And you probably wouldn't want to do all of this in one trip. On the other hand, if you drove all night, you could watch the eclipse and then come back home the next day. As long as there's more than one driver. We also have a total lunar eclipse. The solar eclipses and lunar eclipses come together, separated by 2 weeks. This one's on May the 26th, so it's before the solar eclipse. Again, another early morning thing, only this time the moon is setting, so it begins at 4:44 when the moon moves into the penumbral part of the shadow, which is this inner ring here. And at 5:37 it sets. So when it sets, the moon is sort of 2/3 covered by the shadow of the earth, and as it sinks down. It's a bright sky at 5:30 in the morning on May the 26th, but I suspect that with a decent horizon and a clear sky, that could be quite a spectacular picture, just sinking down into the horizon. And of course, it'll be extra red because of the depth that it is, or the altitude that it is above the horizon. So we still got 2 comets around. Comet Palomar, not very bright, but it's steady. And you see that it's actually above Arcturus here in Boyce, but it's also moving down this way, so that after a month, it's going to be in about this location. So very easily located. Even though it's not particularly bright, the usual sort of fuzzy green blob. And then here's a comet that we talked about last month, Comet Atlas. This is a slightly brighter. You can see the light curve here, and it's hanging in at around 9th and 10th magnitude. It's expected to fade away. It says 11 in the text, but if this graph is right, it may actually still be around 10th magnitude. And this one is above Leo, which is another easy place to find it. Almost it's moving down this way so that it'll end up about here after a month. So you could use the Bright Star Regulus to find it, especially later on in the month. And so we come to the cat. And it looks like cats like refractors. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jay.
Stop sharing.
And there you go.
Right on. Thank you very much, Jay. Our next speaker tonight is Dr. Michelle Boyce. who's a physicist at the University of Manitoba, and she will be bringing us up to speed on what's new. Please welcome Michelle Boyce. And you're muted, Michelle.
I'm unmuted now. I was just getting myself together. Okay, so can everyone see my slide? What's new?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is just my cover thing. Basically, it's Perseverance taking a selfie. And also you can see the Ingenuity helicopter in the background. Come on. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So on April the 19th, Ingenuity made its first inaugural flight, which you should see it take off in a second. You can see it here. Video's not being cooperative. Hang on, let me. There we go. There. Okay, so you can see it spinning up, and then it will take off, hover, and then come back down. I had given some stats on this before, so the stats here on the left. A couple of things to note: the temperature on Mars can vary around the equator, can vary from minus 128 to 27 Celsius. It's 0.38 Gs of Earth gravity, and the atmosphere is 1% atmosphere. So you have to lift this 4-pound object up in a very thin atmosphere, so it spins up at 2,400 RPM. Okay, so there's been 5 flights now, and this is actually a flight with sound. And you'll have to listen very, very carefully. You'll hear a slight humming noise that's coming from the helicopter. The noise you're hearing right now is the wind. So I'm going to be quiet for a second. Really hard to hear. I believe that's the sound right there. Yes, that's the helicopter sound. And there's a slight Doppler shift as it goes away. So all of these videos are available on the NASA website. They're for public use. So even if you see them on YouTube, you can go to the NASA website and grab them. So it's done 5 flights, and I believe, according to Scott on Dome at Home, they're now using it as a scout. So it'll fly ahead, land, and then say, "Hey, rover, come here." Now, that sounds like a game. Anyway, oh, red rover, red, yeah. Anyway, so I will move on to the next one. So the other thing is there's on board, there's an experimental system to make oxygen, and it's called MOXIE, and it's a Mars Oxygen ISRU experiment. ISRU means in situ resource utilization. Remember I said that the Mars atmosphere is about 1% of the Earth's atmosphere, and so you couldn't really breathe on Mars. And also it's about 95% CO2. And then we have other little trace elements here. So MOXIE has inside SOXE, which is a solid oxide electrolysis. So what happens is, if we look, this is MOXIE. It's about the size of a car battery. And this just shows the system that's inside here. It's a 17 kilogram car battery. And basically we have a an inlet filter, a pump, and then a preheater, which heats up this. The system runs at about 800 degrees Celsius. And inside here is the actual converter system, which then splits off into CO and O2 at the bottom. So what happens is it's an electrochemical process where we have a cathode and an anode and some voltage placed across it. So we have this closed circuit. And what happens inside this porous material here is that this interaction takes place by donating 4 electrons to the left-hand side of this equation, which causes this conversion. And the potential difference across here forces the O2, the oxygen ion, to traverse this electrolyte medium, but no electricity travels through, and then that recombines to make O2. So the O2 comes out here, and the CO2 plus other contaminants comes out this side of the system. So now, let's see. Yeah. So they ran, I think this thing is in my way. They ran Moxie. It takes a bit of time to warm up. I think it was about an hour warm up or so. Probably more than an hour by looks of this. And then, yeah, because it took about an hour to create 5.7 grams of oxygen, which is enough for you to survive for 10 minutes on Mars. But at that rate, you wouldn't survive. Basically, you would need a larger system. Its maximum production rate is 6 grams an hour. Now, this is just a test proof of concept to see if you can create oxygen on Mars. And so they were successful at that. And they would have to scale this system up because basically 1 metric ton would support 2 astronauts for a year. And then to get them off the planet, you would need 25 metric tons. Whoops. I hate when my mouse does that. 25 metric tons plus 7 metric tons of fuel. You could use the CO that's come from there as a low-grade fuel, or because there's ice at the poles, you might be able to create methane with the CO2 and water from the ice. So the 2030s, they're sort of toying with the idea of a 1-year return mission, which would require about 200 of these Moxies with a power plant of 20 to 30 kilowatts that would create 2 kilograms of oxygen an hour. Okay. So the next thing is Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are probes that went to see our major gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. And they then sped off out past the influence of the sun. So just like the Earth has a magnetic field and it protects us from the sun. So it buffers radiation coming from the sun, which then through a complicated process ends up producing northern lights or southern lights. The sun has a similar thing, which is this shock termination here. The sun has a magnetic field and there's a terminal shock from rays coming in from the interstellar space. So Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are now in what they consider interstellar space. And so they're measuring plasma properties in that region. And what they've detected is a hum. I would presume this has been in that frequency band, so probably not an audible hum. And so this represents the background noise of interstellar space. And every now and then this hum is interrupted by an event, a solar event that happens at the sun. And by the time it gets out there, then you get these odd events. And you can liken it to listening to rain and then the odd lightning appearing because of a solar event. So Voyager 1 was launched in 1977 and entered interstellar space around 2012, although there was quite a bit of debate as to where interstellar space is. Okay. And one other subject I figured I would cover is the nova found in Cassiopeia. There's been quite a bit of activity on the RASC national site. And I got permission from Dave Hoskin to use his picture he took. And you can see here, basically this is Cassiopeia. And if you go along a line here, you'll run into M52. And you have 3 stars here, and then a little extra reference here, and this bright spot here that is the nova. This was discovered by Yuri. That's his Japanese name. I think I'm pronouncing that in Russian. Nakamura, back in March of this year. Since then, many amateur astronomers and professional astronomers have been observing this and reporting information. And so we have this plot. This plot is the magnitude, or in layman terms, the brightness of the nova. And magnitude kind of works backwards. So the lower the number, the brighter it is. So I put this reference line here showing that this is about the lowest in brightness you could see with the naked eye, and then you would require binoculars. Binoculars would work all the way below. As an example, I believe the sun is minus 27 magnitude, so it's way up here. This is on a log scale, and I forget the moon is around -2 or so. Okay, so these are visible light estimates. And you may have remembered I asked, how do you measure magnitude? So now I know how to measure it. So maybe if I get bored one day, I'll take my scope out. So these are visual estimates, or if you got deep pockets, you can get these filters from Bader and do photometry and measure different frequencies. So that's what this is here. This is using photometry. It's brighter in the red band. And using photometry, you can tell more about the properties and the type of or class of nova it is. And just to quickly explain what a nova is, because a nova is different from a supernova. A supernova is just a one-time event. Star collapses. It could produce a white dwarf star, which I believe is the fate of our sun, or Betelgeuse would produce a black hole. So basically, it would be some kind of binary system where you have a white dwarf star and a companion star, and the material from the star is being bled off and landing on the surface of the white dwarf. And at some point, it builds up to such a point that all of a sudden, a burst of energy is released from the surface. And this event is called a nova. And then this expands outwards. So it starts off bright, expands outwards, and then starts to dim over time. Okay, so now get out your 3D glasses. So let me just put on my 3D glasses here. I hope everyone brought their 3D glasses. So now we can watch the Mars rover in 3D take flight. If you don't have 3D glasses, you can move your head in and out like this, and you should be able to see in 3D. Not sure if everyone caught that reference, but hey. So it's pretty cool. I believe this is I think this was the 5th flight. Anyway, this is the latest thing they have up on the NASA website is the 3D image. So if you just Google NASA Ingenuity images, videos, you'll get this one. This shows up first. So there it is. It flew across and now it's gone back down. Pretty cool. So that's the end of my what's new. So if there's any questions, let me know. I'll just take off my 3D glasses and keep 3D real and recycle.
Looks like we don't have any questions tonight, Michelle.
No, I guess not. Oh, that's the sound again of the helicopter.
Cool. Okay.
Okay, I will end this somehow.
Again, thank you very much, Sarah Michelle, for presenting what's new. So everyone, that brings us to the end of the meeting. I just want to thank all our speakers again for tonight. It was a great turnout, lots of good stuff, lots of new information, lots to look at. And shortly after we close down this meeting, the virtual get-together will happen. And just a reminder, next time we hope to have set up breakout rooms. If you wish to volunteer to host one of the breakout rooms, please contact me and let me know. And with that, have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Don't we just continue?
This
It's the
one,
same link.
Yeah,
There's only one link.
Yeah. Oh, that's true too. That's right too. Sorry, I forgot about that. There you go. I have to pop off because I got to make another phone call. And we will talk to you all later and have a wonderful evening.
Okay.
Bye-bye.